This is admittedly a bit of an experiment, a conversation of sorts between me and you, having to do with, well, how to create the life that we want, a life that feels like the one that we were meant to live, and without all the struggling and striving and all the other rigmarole that most of us have been taught is necessary. And so, without any fancy fanfare, no high production value, just us talking and me sharing some of the things that I've seen work over the last 30 some odd years of teaching spirituality, manifestation, mysticism, and yoga. And today I thought I'd start with a little discussion about the two main vehicles that I've found work better than anything else, and that acknowledge the actual way that, well, reality is created, which is why they work so well. And those two vehicles are spirituality on the one hand and manifestation on the other. And yes, they do look like different vehicles, and truthfully, as we'll see in future videos, they really are one and the same. But for our purposes today, I thought I'd talk about each one distinctly, so that we have at least something of a foundation to move forward from. And we'll start with spirituality. So for our purposes here, when we talk about spirituality, we're not going to think about a spiritual realm as opposed to a material realm, as much as we want to think about spiritual techniques and practices, or as I'd like to think of them, spiritual technologies that move us from the, what conventionally would be called spiritual ignorance, spiritual ignorance, or ignoring the part of you that is more fundamental than this body-mind, the part of you that's literally eternal and free and spacious right now even, and the part that's been covered up by the struggles and the distractions of not only daily life, but of this body-mind itself. And importantly, we want to keep in mind that the doorway to that recognition, because again, you haven't become disconnected and you're not trying to go somewhere, is to recognize what's always already been true. But the doorway to that recognition just happens to be something that we would call inner peace or stillness. Be still and know that I am God. And it's in the midst of that distraction-free state that we're then able to notice what has always been true. And that is who we are fundamentally beneath the waves of the thoughts and the doubts, the anxieties and the problems and the troubles and all the rest of it. And that thing, as I hope you will see through this series that we're creating here, is already fulfilled and is already and always at peace. So that's the spirituality aspect of this. But here's where a lot of people go wrong, and in fact a lot of traditions go wrong, is that in this quest for the so-called spiritual, they have a tendency to, I don't know, demonize, maybe too strong of a word, but we're going to go with it, demonize the material, forgetting that this material thing has legitimate needs. And so long as we ignore those needs, this material thing, the agent of distraction that keeps us walled off from the experience of our true self, becomes more and more distracting and more problematic, moving us further away from the so-called spiritual goal rather than towards it, all in the name of doing spiritual practices. And this is where manifestation can become so powerful. Because while you may make the argument that the spiritual side of the equation is one that allows us to connect with our spiritual selves, the material or the manifestational side of the equation helps us to provide for the very real material needs of this material being by creating, literally, a life in this 3D material reality that feeds it in the way that it needs to be fed. and in the way that it wants to be fed. But even more important, and here's the little cool ninja trick about manifestation, is manifestation actually tricks the ego into going along with your spiritual practices. Because the practices of manifestation are literally spiritual practices, things like manifestation and visualization and meditation. All things that are really designed to calm the mind and to control this body-mind mechanism. And in manifestation, sure, we do it in the name of maybe some shiny object, like a relationship or financial abundance. But it need not end there. But the best thing is those shiny objects, so-called, are what the ego wants. So rather than, as happens in traditional spiritual practices, rather than trying to wrestle the ego into meditating or wrestle the ego into doing yoga or wrestle the ego into some other spiritual practice, because the ego sees that the spiritual practice is the vehicle to get what it wants and needs legitimately in the material realm, it willingly goes along with the same practice that it would resist if it were just done in purely spiritual terms. And so that's the beauty of it. And the really interesting thing is how the spiritual practices and the manifestation practices literally overlap with one another. So if this kind of exploration feels like it speaks to you, and my hope is that it does, stick around, because we'll be doing more videos like this, and help me spread the word. And if it serves you, I'll see you soon. And if not, I wish you well. Now, go have some fun.